Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Engle. I'm the author of Be the Light That You Are. And I am truly honored today to be speaking with Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen. We're going to be talking about a topic that she is uniquely qualified to speak to, and that is the topic of self-care. Jean, thanks so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, and let's see what happens when we talk about these things.
Wonderful. That's what I love about this, is that they truly are conversations, and there is so much that we could talk about because of your long and distinguished career. You have helped women in particular, people of both genders, but especially women over the years, to tap into their inner gifts, their intuition, their passions, and to find new ways to care for themselves, for their communities, and for Mother Earth herself. So I want to touch on all of those different topics as we talk this morning. But first, I want to give you a proper introduction because you have such really a storied career in everything that you've done. So let me just share with everyone who's watching a little bit about your background. You are a Jungian analyst, author, and activist. You're a distinguished life fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. You were a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California at San Francisco, and you have a private practice in Mill Valley, California. You're also the author of 13 books, and this is a mind-boggling statistic to me, but they're in over 90 foreign editions. Those include Goddesses in Every Woman, Gods in Every Man, Crossing to Avalon, The Millionth Circle, Crones Don't Whine, Urgent Message from Mother, and Artemis, the indomitable, I always have a hard time with that word, spirit in every woman, indomitable. There we go. You are also an NGO representative to the United Nations of Women's World Summit Foundation, and you're a leading advocate for the 5th World Conference on Women that'll be held in India in 2022. So you truly have a vision and wisdom about women and about humanity that's been felt around the world. So that's what I want to talk about and just touch on today, because in so many ways you have spoken to this topic of self-care. So what I'd like to do at first is to just ask you, in Be the Light That You Are, I talk about how self-care, there's a self-care with a little s and a self-care with a capital S, right? So self-care with a little s can be,
I noticed.
Yeah, having a spa day. But there's self-care with a big S, and I'd love to know what you think about that.
Well, they're actually not terms that I use myself, but I certainly can relate to them. And it is a little confusing to do the small s and the large s. As a Jungian analyst, it's Carl Jung who introduced the idea of self with a large S. Oh, sometimes he wrote it with a little s, and so that's why it gets confusing. But that's the self that I know to be the most important. And because self is a word that covers those big, awesome, deep concepts such as God, Goddess, Tao, all that is, the universe, the kind of sense that we all have access to something that is deeply human and divine, that there's something from the very time we toddle out into the world, the sense of wonder, the sense of awe, the feeling that we are connected to something that's invisible as well as visible. This all encompasses the notion of the big self, and that when our ego is tilted towards the self, we get energy from it. It feels like we have support, somebody, something, some energy, angels, whatever you want to call it, have our back as we take a true path that is our own. I mean, that's the other thing, is that you can't be in touch with the larger self unless you're real, unless you're authentic, unless you are not all caught up with trying to have a perfect look in the world. That's more the persona in Jungian psychology. So what we put on. I mean, it's important that we have an adequate persona, that we dress up our attitude and our clothes to be appropriate when we go, to a dance club on one hand to church on the other. You don't wear the same stuff. That's the persona. The little self that you describe, I'd like you to tell me more about what that encompasses, and I'll comment back to you on it.
Okay, great. Well, and to me, I think about that small s self being that ego, that smaller part of us that is all consumed by the image, by what we wear, by looking out there at the outer landscape of our life and trying to find love, trying to find joy and happiness in that outer world. And I think of the self, the capital S self, very much as you described it, that it is that connection to something higher, greater, deeper, that it taps into who we are as human beings, but also as spiritual beings as well. So that ego, I think, would be more of our personality, our inner fears about, are we lovable? Are we enough? Will we be successful? What do people think of us? So how does that align with your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking that we all come into the world connected to the larger self. But here we come, our little ego comes in this package called a baby and comes into a family that has a level of dysfunction wherever it is. But what if we chose to come in some way? What if we're spiritual beings on a human path rather than human beings who may, as adults, choose a spiritual path? What if we are innately spiritual and that we have at some level chosen perhaps to come into the particular body, family, and time that we're in? Now, this may or may not be true, but it is. But when you are on your own path, as I feel I am, I get a sense of, boy, this is a intense and important time to have a voice. That it's an especially important time to be a woman. I was in my residency in psychiatry when feminism came of age in the late 60s. And then in the 70s, it was a decade of the woman. And there was suddenly women defining themselves. And actually, that is what really matters about yourself. Do you get to define who you are? What moves your heart? What you love? What you perceive as beauty? What you feel when you feel that you're on a path and doing the life you came to do? I mean, that there's a certain inner compass that nobody can tell you that this is right for you. But when you start to tune into what's inside, there is a quality of knowingness of, I don't know where I'm going on this path, but there's something about being drawn to something from inside out that is part of the individuation path or the soul path or the decision to follow who you are inside in order that you become who you were meant to be on the outside. And the other thing is that the path is sort of labyrinthine-like. There are U-turns. You think that, oh, you're right on. You're going to go right down that path and you're going to, and then, oops, U-turn. Something happens, often not terrific. It may undermine your sense of self. It may undermine your sense of meaning. But will you keep on that path and find that sense of what links you to the path again? I mean, this is what depth psychology is about, really. It's about going deeper and looking from inside out and reclaiming parts that other people may have seen emerge as a youngster and squashed it. People in our family don't do that. What do you mean you want to be an artist? You're supposed to make a living. People don't make a living as an artist. I mean, there's so many messages that we get growing up that we have to decide whether we will let outside forces shape us or whether we will work between what's inside and outside to be on a particular path that we grow on. I mean, the thing about life is that if you sit stagnant doing the same thing, like every holiday is exactly the same, you say the same things to the same people, and then you're surprised that sometimes you don't know why you're sad or why you reacted with anger. Well, you don't know unless you know yourself more inside and know what really matters to you.
Beautiful. So
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just thinking that creativity is one of the major experiences that we all have, and unfortunately, the wordsmiths usually put creativity only in the fine arts. But creativity is using what your intuition and your gifts say about all kinds of things. You can be creative working in the garden. Certainly, that's a very creative place. How do you create a bouquet once you pick from the garden, or the vegetables? How do you cook creatively? There's something about following directions, which is a way to learn a basic thing. But once you learn a basic thing, will you start to bring your own creative energies to it? And when you are able to lose track of time, when you are doing something that so absorbs you, or you are having a conversation that so absorbs you, or you are listening to something that so absorbs you, that time goes by and you're surprised. It felt like 20 minutes and it was 2 hours. Well, that's an indication that that's part of your soul path, because there's something about it that you lose track of. How does it look to other people, for example? Or it is a way of knowing yourself and what matters to you when you lose track of time when you're doing it, or when you get to do a little bit of it, and yet it means so much to you that it feels like the most important thing that happened in the whole day, and yet it was 10 minutes out of 24 hours. And nobody can tell you, no one on earth can tell you about the meaning it has to you when you can be so absorbed in it, and that the meaning has to do with a combination of all that you are, really. That's a little esoteric sounding. So let's say it's you being on track. It's you having a sense of joy. I mean, creativity brings out a sense of joy in the doing of it, and so much joy is stifled in, which is natural for a child, that the problem that so many people get into is that their inner child did not have a chance to keep up with you as you got to be older, and then sometimes only when you get in your last third of life or fourth of life do you have enough freedom to be idiosyncratic that you can bring your inner child again back into your life. You can be weird. you can be idiosyncratic. And real to yourself. I mean, there's something to not following a script.
I love that. So many things that I'd love to go back and follow up on there. One of them is that idea about the inner GPS, that inner system, that knowing of what brings us joy, gives us that sense of being just lost in this joyful energy for what seems like a couple of hours when it's just a few minutes. For people who maybe have had some of that diminished in them or discouraged, for the people who grew up feeling like their authentic self was stomped on when they were little, what would you say are some of the first things maybe they could do to start reconnecting with what brings them joy inside themselves?
They first need to remember, that when you're cut off from something, the word dismember comes to mind. You're dismembered if your arm is cut off. Well, you're dismembered when you forget things that really affected you. And maybe you didn't have the words for it, but when you have the potentiality of remembering that which you got cut off from, that which you had trouble remembering because you didn't have a word for it before, or somebody put a bad label on it. But if you sit with yourself and remember and start listening maybe even to dreams, when you have a sense of what moves your heart, what feels beautiful to you, what can you remember of, even thinking about what went on in a given day, what do you remember really was special? Often it was a connection. It may have been a moment of solitude when you just felt good. But you need to remember what matters to you. And the inner child is that spontaneous part that is in the moment. And the Me Too movement, the whole idea of a woman being able to assert her feelings is often something, and be heard. I mean, the thing about the Me Too movement, first the Women's March, to find yourself marching because something in you felt like joining whatever this was, and some other women closer to you, or maybe it came on the internet, and you just decided to say, yes, I don't know what this is about, but I'm going to join the Women's March. And then you find that, lo and behold, you are part of lots of women, and the energy feels good. Okay, that's what's emerging in the culture now. Then comes the Me Too movement, and the I thought that was so freeing for women who have been molested or beaten or subdued in so many ways and ashamed. And then they find that there's lots of company in the Me Too movement, and when you voice what's really happened to you, when you speak up and find words and find them validated, when instead of pushing people away as you were afraid it would do, because something bad, this is the inner kid, by the way, that there's an innate justice in children, that if you're treated badly, you think you must be bad. Now, that is so wrong. So if you were molested, if you were treated badly as a child, you were ashamed of what happened to you. Not only were you treated badly and you think you deserved it, but you actually feel ashamed of what that adult should really have felt ashamed about. But no, you got it. And then you share it. And you find that, first of all, you're not alone. And secondly, it shouldn't have happened to you. And now you find your voice. And you free up something in yourself. It's about an internal freedom as well as a women's movement that is letting women discover who they are. And to be a woman is a pretty, increasingly, if women are realizing that in a culture that educates us, that brings feminism in, it's easier these days, I think, to be a whole person and a woman than it is to be a man in this culture. Because I think men and their inner children are really suppressed. So they get to have power. And from power comes greed. But that's really not much fun, because you're going to die anyway, like everybody else. So what are you going to do? The poet like Mary Oliver, whose recent death made me feel like I lost a friend, even though I did see her on stage. I did see her interviewed, but I didn't know her personally. But I know a soul connection through her poetry. And so when she died, I had a feeling of losing a friend, but that her words would keep on in us. And the phrase, she had so many phrases that touch on soul.
Yeah, I think the one that so many people think about is the one of, what will you do with your one life? And I know I'm not quoting that quite right, but yeah.
Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Mm-hmm. Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Here we go.
For each of us to feel that this is a gift. Life is a precious gift to us. And what are we going to do with it? But wild is that word for me that is what you came in with that was innate. It's like the other word for it is applied to things like forests, virgin forests. It hasn't been logged. It hasn't been tromped on. It hasn't had roads through it. It's what you came in with. It was a talent or an archetype. The reason I write about archetypes, and Artemis is a good one to think about, is do you feel at home out in nature? Not everyone does, but if you have that archetype and you're out under the stars, and the reality is that you may have been churched or went through a lot of religions, but the place where you felt truly in touch with something that was amazing, numinous, divine, was when you were out in nature. But that wasn't supposed to be spiritual. That wasn't supposed to be religion. So don't consider it until you start defining for yourself. What is it? What does your one wild and precious life respond to? And of course, Mary Oliver wrote about nature all the time. That was her teacher.
You spoke about, with the Me Too movement, the power of women coming together, sharing their stories. And you've created a movement in this world around the millionth circle, the idea of women coming together in circles, supporting one another, caring for one another. And in the process of doing that, caring for themselves, families, communities, and the planet as a whole as well. What do you see? What would you say to someone who maybe is feeling disconnected, who's looking for community? What's the power of being in community, and how can people start to connect if they're feeling alone or adrift?
Well, sometimes people live in families where, and they have to work so hard. There's certain phases of life when you work for a living and you have a household or kids, husband, or something. So you hardly have any time yourself. This is where often the first glimmerings of it is through a podcast, is through a book, is through going to something and realizing that there are people in this audience that must have an affinity for the same things I do. You actually have to be able to decide that you want something and really go a bit on the hunt for it. The thing about soul, though, however, is that when you are in touch with a large self, because it does have meaning, whatever this is, and you make a commitment to try to find or do or be something that is an inner kind of important thought or feeling, this is when you invite synchronicity. This is when meaningful coincidences happen. But you still then have to decide when it comes along, will you say yes? All along, there are these choice points where we can choose to change our path or keep on just as we are. I mean, over and over again, there are these choice points. And I'm in thinking of the small s, self-care, it occurred to me that I'm used to hearing it responding to women who are looking after their health and things like that, who are taking care of their bodies. And I think that's all part of it, but it's a bigger picture than that. And yet it does matter if you care for yourself, your spiritual self, your embodied self, your own health. I mean, what do you care enough about yourself to take care of yourself as if you were a friend to yourself? You know, that sounds simple, but it actually isn't. We get so trained to be outer directed. We look out after everybody else. If you're a good woman, you do that.
Right.
So I know the word, somebody wrote a book or wrote the topic was something like sacred selfishness. It's confusing using the word self, big, little, etc.
So really, in looking at the self as the whole, that whether it's little s or big S, it's all part of who we are, and all part of the care for ourselves and for others as well. Would that be accurate?
It's accurate, and in the internal message that you can get from yourself, from prayer, meditation, from being in a group of like-souled people. But hopefully you got it when you came into the world, but that isn't true for everybody. And the message is you matter. Treat yourself as if you matter. Treat yourself as if you are precious. Because by the time you're an adult, the care of body and soul and relationship now is with you, the choice maker and the perceiver. And can you become discerning? Can you start realizing that you are affected by the world outside, but not be totally trying to please the outside, and you are being acted on by the archetypes or the gifts inside? And you are right there as choice maker. You have to be discerning about, well, what do you do with your 24 hours in the day? It goes by so fast, and the years go by so fast. So you'd better start to think about, it matters. You matter. So if you matter, what are you going to do with this hour that you have, or this day that you have? Will you take a sense at the end of the day? Was this a good day? Did you learn anything? Did you love anything? Or are you just worn out? that really start thinking, feeling, caring for this person that you are. Basically, you matter is the message.
Right. Very good. Well, just one more question to kind of broaden the topic about self-care and how it connects with the greater whole. You've written about the urgent need for care of this planet, for care of Mother Earth. You've also been optimistic about women's ability in particular to bring balance to this earth as we care for ourselves and one another. So I want to just ask you, are you as optimistic as ever? And what do you consider the biggest challenge that we face now that maybe could be addressed through our own self-care and care for others as well?
Well, I am optimistic because we are in a time where what we do can make all the difference. So the more you get involved in doing something that makes a difference, the more activism you have, there is despair. I mean, activism is actually an antidote to despair. If you are doing something to improve the bit that's right in front of you, then you are contributing to make it better rather than worse. And right now, that's what brought women out to the march. We had elected a president. We would have had the first woman president. We didn't. We had this man come that we had seen on the Access Hollywood tapes, really using women. We saw this, and there was the inauguration. The day after the inauguration, the women marched. Now, that says that president, our current President Trump, was the best mobilizer of grassroots feminism, grassroots activism, so that he really inadvertently set us off to work on improving whatever matters to us that we love and want to work on. Mm-hmm. And we are in that place where if we take part in especially the environment and children, to which we are all connected. I mean, that's the other thing, is that we are all connected to this planet, the people on it. When humanity first saw the Earth from outer space, one of the things about it was thinking about the Earth as she. She was beautiful. And in the middle of nowhere, this is home. This is our home. And we, human beings, without the caring sister, mother, we are related. We're on the verge of doing it in, because the Earth will continue. So I'm optimistic because for one thing, I do activist things, and it isn't always the activist extrovert. It's very often the activist introvert. I sit behind this computer and can reach a lot of people. All of us can. This is a good time to be an activist. It's a good time to be a woman because we can make a difference. And then we have a sense that what we are doing is meaningful. If we help and affect that which we love, it will make a difference.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. As we wrap up, as I always wish that we could have more time because there's so much more to talk about, but I so appreciate your sharing these insights with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Just to think about life maybe as an adventure that has dark times, adversity, problems, but if you think of yourself as a spiritual being on a human path, as a heroine in your own life story, that what you are going to be confronted with may be difficult, but some part of you knows inside that what comes along and confronts you is not more than you can handle. There's some strength within yourself that you can handle this. And you have to decide for yourself what your inner compass, which is the heart, really. It's the heart chakra. It's that part in us, it's in the middle of our chest. And when we hear something that moves us, you'll start to notice, if you pay attention to your heart chakra, that there's an ache And then there's a joy. I mean, there's something about not knowing everything from the head. That's logos. Then there's gnosis, it's another Greek word for what we know in our bones, in our heart, in our soul. You described compass earlier, and that's all-encompassing compass. And you're giving, each of us that writes, presents what we write to the world. And the vocabulary and the models we use fits the people that I think synchronistically are drawn to the particular way that we express what we know. And essentially, you and I in your writing, we use a different vocabulary often, but we're talking a lot about the same things, I think. Mm-hmm. To your readers, you are saying you matter and that you have choices. And that the largest self is an infusion of something that will help you to become who you were meant to be. All of that fits together.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's absolutely true that I think there's so much affinity in what we're communicating, the messages that we want to bring out into the world. And that's, I think, the remarkable thing. There are so many voices in this world, and we need them all talking about how we care for ourselves and one another. So, right. So thank you for being one of those leading voices, someone who has inspired me for many years in very, very deep ways. So I'm sending you blessings for all of your work, all of the things that you do to bring light to this world. I invite everybody who's listening and watching to visit Jean's website, jeanshinodabolen.com, for information about her work, her events, workshops, her books. And also, if you'd like to find out more about Be the Light That You Are and hear other interviews with authors and remarkable thought leaders like Jean, you can go to my website, debraengle.com. So once again, Jean, thank you so much for your time, for your sharing. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And on this particular day when it's supposed to be so cold outside, be warm.
Thank you. You as well. That's speaking right back to our hearts. So thank you, Jean. And to everyone watching, just keep letting your light shine. Your heart and your warmth speak to the world. Thanks, everyone.